I never thought I'd be sitting in my Honda Civic at 7:23 a.m., hands trembling as I stared at my office building, wondering if today would be the day I'd lose everything I'd worked 23 years to build. The email from HR was still glowing on my phone screen. Meeting requested, Tuesday 9 a.m., personnel matter, confidential. Those two words, personnel matter, had kept me awake all night, my mind racing through every possible scenario. If you enjoy dramatic life stories like this one, smash that like button and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from. My name is Margaret Johnson. I'm 57 years old, and until yesterday, I thought I knew exactly who I could trust in my life. I've been the senior accounting manager at Morrison & Associates for over 2 decades, never missed a deadline, never had a single complaint in my file. My desk is organized, my reports are flawless, and the closest I come to drinking during work hours is the vanilla creamer I put in my afternoon coffee. But someone has been telling my boss, David Morrison himself, that I've been showing up to work intoxicated. The worst part? I think I know exactly who's been spreading these lies. Cheryl Patterson started working in our department 6 months ago, all bright smiles and eager questions about learning from someone with so much experience. At 51, she seemed grateful to finally land a stable position after being laid off from her previous job. I took her under my wing, showed her our systems, even covered for her mistakes during those first few weeks when she was still learning. She'd bring me coffee in the mornings, ask about my weekend plans, compliment my work in front of others. I thought we were becoming friends. But over the past month, I'd noticed subtle changes. The way she'd glance at me when I came back from lunch. How she'd suddenly appear near David's office whenever I was called in for routine meetings. Last week, when I had to take my allergy medication that made me slightly drowsy, she made a point of asking loudly if I was feeling all right in front of 3 other coworkers. When I stumbled slightly getting up from my desk, those same pale green eyes that used to look at me with admiration were watching me with something that looked almost satisfied. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. Cheryl wasn't concerned about me. She was building a case against me. I pulled into my driveway that evening, my mind spinning with the implications. If David believed these accusations, I could lose my job, my reputation, everything I'd spent decades building. At 57, starting over wasn't just daunting. It felt impossible. I sat in my car for a full 10 minutes before I found the courage to walk into my house and face my husband. Robert Johnson was in the kitchen making his famous Tuesday night spaghetti, humming along to the oldies station like he had every Tuesday for the past 32 years of our marriage. At 61, he still moved around our kitchen with the same easy confidence that had attracted me all those years ago. His silver hair catching the light as he stirred the sauce. He looked up when I walked in, and his smile immediately faded when he saw my face. "Maggie, what's wrong? You look like someone died." I set my purse down on the counter with shaking hands. "Robert, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to believe it." My voice cracked as I explained about the HR meeting, about my growing suspicions regarding Cheryl, about the fear that was eating me alive from the inside out. Robert turned off the burner and pulled me into his arms, the familiar scent of his cologne mixing with the garlic and basil. "Honey, anyone who knows you would never believe such nonsense. You're the most responsible person I've ever met. You organize our medicine cabinet alphabetically, for crying out loud." But I could see the worry creeping into his brown eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he thought I wasn't looking. We both knew that in today's workplace, accusations alone could be enough to destroy a career, especially for someone my age. That night, I called my best friend, Sarah Williams, who'd been my confidant through every major crisis of my adult life. Sarah had been my maid of honor, had held my hand through my mother's funeral, and had celebrated every promotion and milestone with me over our 40-year friendship. If anyone would know what to do, it would be Sarah. "Margaret, this is absolutely insane," Sarah said after I'd laid out the whole situation. "I've known you since we were 17 years old. You barely drink wine at Christmas dinner. This Cheryl woman has some serious nerve, and we're going to figure out exactly what her game is." Sarah worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown, and her analytical mind had gotten me through more problems than I could count. "First thing tomorrow, you're going to that meeting with your head held high," she continued. "But before you do, we need to gather evidence. Think about it, Margaret. People don't just make up stories like this without a motive. What does Cheryl have to gain by destroying your reputation?" As I lay in bed that night, Robert's steady breathing beside me, I replayed every interaction I'd had with Cheryl over the past 6 months. The way she'd asked so many detailed questions about my responsibilities, how she'd volunteered to help with the quarterly reports that only senior staff typically handled, the casual way she'd mentioned that she'd always dreamed of being in management someday. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. The trap I'd missed finally sprang shut. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching the knot of dread that had taken up permanent residence in my stomach. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing down my navy blazer for the 3rd time, trying to project a confidence I absolutely didn't feel. Robert had already left for his early shift at the plant, but not before squeezing my shoulders and reminding me that the truth always finds a way to surface. The office felt different when I walked in at 7:30, like the very air had shifted against me. I kept my head high as Sarah had instructed, nodding to the security guard and taking the elevator to the 14th floor where I'd worked for the past 8 years. My hands trembled slightly as I swiped my badge, and I wondered if this might be one of the last times I'd perform this simple routine. Cheryl was already at her desk when I passed, her blonde head bent over a stack of papers with what seemed like exaggerated focus. She didn't look up as I walked by, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her pen stopped moving for just a moment. For someone who'd been so chatty and concerned about my well-being over the past few weeks, her sudden avoidance felt like another piece of evidence clicking into place. I settled into my cubicle and tried to focus on preparing for the 9 o'clock meeting, but my mind kept wandering to what Sarah had said about motives. Cheryl was ambitious. That much had been clear from day one. She'd mentioned several times how she'd left her previous job because there was no room for advancement, how she was eager to take on more responsibility. And lately, she'd been asking increasingly specific questions about my accounts, my relationships with clients, even my salary range. At 8:45, I gathered my files and walked toward the conference room, my heels clicking against the polished linoleum with what felt like thunderous volume. Mr. Davidson was already there, his silver hair perfectly styled as always, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. Linda Martinez from HR sat beside him, her dark suit crisp and professional, a manila folder thick with documents spread before her. "Margaret, thank you for coming in early," Mr. Davidson said, gesturing to the chair across from them. "I know this is an uncomfortable situation for everyone involved." I took my seat, clasping my hands in my lap to keep them steady. "I appreciate the opportunity to address these concerns directly. I can assure you that the allegations are completely false." Linda opened her folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. "Margaret, we've received multiple reports over the past 3 weeks suggesting that you've been consuming alcohol during work hours. The reports indicate that colleagues have smelled alcohol on your breath during meetings and that your performance has been inconsistent." The word multiple hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on Cheryl that I hadn't considered the possibility of others being involved, or worse, that my paranoia might be completely misplaced. Multiple reports? From whom? I can't share specific names at this time, But I can tell you that the concerns have been raised by more than one individual," Linda replied, her voice carefully neutral. Mr. Davidson leaned forward, his expression troubled. "Margaret, you've been a valued employee here for 8 years. Your work has always been exemplary, which is why these reports are so concerning. If you're struggling with personal issues, we want to help. We have an employee assistance program that provides confidential support." The implication stung worse than an outright accusation. They weren't just questioning my sobriety. They were questioning my integrity, my professionalism, everything I'd built over nearly a decade with this company. "I understand your position, but I need you to know that I have never consumed alcohol at work. Not once. I rarely drink at all, and certainly never during business hours." "Then how do you explain the consistency of these reports?" Linda asked, making notes on her legal pad. "We're talking about observations from multiple sources over several weeks." I thought about Sarah's advice, about gathering evidence and considering motives. "I'd like to know more about the specific nature of these reports. What exactly was observed, and when?" "If someone is making false accusations, I have a right to understand what I'm defending myself against." Linda and Mr. Davidson exchanged glances. It was Mr. Davidson who spoke first. "The reports indicate alcohol on your breath during the Monday morning staff meetings, unsteady behavior during client presentations, and what appeared to be alcohol containers in your desk area." My mouth fell open. "Alcohol containers? In my desk? That's absolutely impossible." I stood up, my chair rolling backward. "You can search my desk right now. You can search my purse, my car, anywhere you'd like. I have nothing to hide." "Margaret, please sit down," Mr. Davidson said gently. "We're not conducting a search. We're trying to have a conversation." But I was already moving toward the door. "No, I want you to see for yourself. If someone is claiming there's evidence in my workspace, let's look at it together right now." The three of us walked across the office floor, passing curious colleagues who quickly looked away when they saw our small procession. I noticed Cheryl's desk was empty now, her computer screen dark, though her coffee mug was still steaming and her jacket hung on the back of her chair. I pulled out my desk drawers one by one, removing files, office supplies, and personal items with methodical precision. Breath mints, hand lotion, a small bottle of ibuprofen, photographs of Robert and our golden retriever. No alcohol, no evidence of anything inappropriate. "There," I said, stepping back so they could see clearly. "Every drawer, every compartment, nothing." Linda made more notes while Mr. Davidson examined the contents with careful attention. I could see doubt creeping into his expression, the first crack in whatever narrative had been built around my alleged behavior. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Tucked behind my computer monitor, barely visible unless you were standing at exactly the right angle, was a small silver flask. My hands trembled as I stared at the flask. The silver surface caught the fluorescent office lighting, and I could see it was partially filled with some amber liquid. It sat there like an accusation, perfectly positioned where someone walking by could glimpse it if they looked carefully. "I have never seen that before in my life," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mr. Davidson reached for the flask with a tissue, handling it like evidence. The smell of whiskey immediately filled the air around us. Linda scribbled furiously on her notepad while I stood frozen, watching my career crumble before my eyes. "Margaret, this is very concerning," Mr. Davidson said, his earlier doubt now replaced with stern disappointment. "The flask appears to have been recently used." "Because I didn't put it there." The words came out sharper than I intended. "Someone planted this. Someone is deliberately trying to sabotage me." Even as I said it, I knew how paranoid it sounded. But the alternative was accepting responsibility for something I absolutely had not done. Linda cleared her throat. Margaret, I think we need to continue this conversation in my office. These are serious allegations you're making. As we walked back toward the conference room, I caught sight of Cheryl returning to her desk. She moved quietly, settling into her chair and immediately focusing on her computer screen with unusual intensity. Something about her careful avoidance of eye contact made my stomach twist. Back in the conference room, I found myself studying Linda's face as she reviewed her notes. Her expression was professional, but not entirely unsympathetic. Mr. Davidson looked troubled, like a parent trying to understand how his child had gotten into such serious trouble. "I need to call my sister," I said suddenly. "Sarah, she's been helping me think through this situation." "This meeting isn't over, Margaret," Linda replied. "But you can make a brief call if necessary." I stepped into the hallway and dialed Sarah's number with shaking fingers. She answered on the second ring. "Margaret, how did the meeting go?" "Sarah, they found a flask in my desk, behind my computer monitor. I swear to you, I have never seen it before." My voice cracked as I spoke. There was a long pause before Sarah responded. "Someone put it there." That's what I told them, but I sound like I'm making excuses. Sarah, what if they fire me? What if this destroys everything Robert and I have worked for? "Listen to me," Sarah said firmly. "You're not crazy, and you're not paranoid. Someone is doing this to you deliberately. The question is why, and we need to figure out who has access to your desk area." Cheryl was acting strange just now. She avoided looking at me completely, and her timing coming back to her desk was suspicious. I glanced back toward the conference room where Linda and Mr. Davidson were waiting. "Cheryl has access to your workspace?" "She sits 2 desks away from me. She could easily slip something behind my monitor when I'm in the bathroom or at lunch." The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. "Sarah, what if she's been doing this all along? What if she's the one who's been making the reports? Why would she want to hurt you?" I thought about the promotion I'd received last month. The client presentation Cheryl had wanted to lead, the way she'd seemed increasingly distant over the past few weeks. Professional jealousy, maybe? I got the Morrison account that she wanted. "Margaret, you need to go back in there and ask them directly who has been making these reports. You have a right to know your accuser." "What if they won't tell me?" "Then you make it clear that you're not going down without a fight. And Margaret, don't sign anything today. Tell them you need time to process this and consult with someone." I ended the call and returned to the conference room where Linda and Mr. Davidson were speaking in low voices. They stopped talking when I entered. "I need to know who has been making these reports about me," I said, taking my seat with more confidence than I felt. If someone is making false accusations, I deserve to face my accuser directly. Linda and Mr. Davidson exchanged another look. Finally, Linda spoke. "The reports came from Cheryl Morrison. She expressed concern about your behavior and felt it was her duty to inform management." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Cheryl Morrison. The same last name as the client account I'd recently taken over. The connection hit me like a physical blow. "Is Cheryl related to the Morrison Industries account?" I asked. Mr. Davidson nodded slowly. "Richard Morrison is her uncle. She had initially been slated to manage that relationship, but we felt your experience was better suited for the account." Everything clicked into place. The timeline, the motivation, the access, the carefully planted evidence, but proving it would be another matter entirely. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. I felt my hands tremble slightly as I processed what I'd just learned. Cheryl hadn't just been jealous of my promotion. She'd been personally affected by it. This wasn't professional rivalry. This was family business. "So let me understand this correctly," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. Cheryl Morrison, whose uncle is Richard Morrison of Morrison Industries, has been reporting that I've been drinking at work, and this started right around the time I was assigned to manage her uncle's account instead of her. Linda shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Margaret, we understand how this might look, but we can't ignore multiple reports of concerning behavior, regardless of the source. Multiple reports? How many times has she come to you? Mr. Davidson consulted his notes. 3 separate occasions over the past 2 weeks. Each time, she seemed genuinely worried about you and reluctant to report it. Of course she seemed reluctant. That would make her appear more credible, more concerned colleague than vindictive accuser. I had to admire the calculated nature of her approach, even as it made me sick. And in all of these reports, what exactly did she claim to have observed? She said she noticed the smell of alcohol on your breath during afternoon meetings. She mentioned that your behavior seemed erratic, and that she was concerned about your well-being. Linda replied. I thought about every interaction I'd had with Cheryl over the past 2 weeks. She'd been the one to suggest I join her for coffee twice last week. She'd offered me gum both times, claiming she had extra. She'd also made a point of standing close to me during the Morrison Industries conference call, the one where we discussed the campaign strategy that I'd ultimately presented to her uncle. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, I said. Has anyone else reported smelling alcohol on me? Anyone other than Cheryl? Linda and Mr. Davidson exchanged glances again. The pause told me everything I needed to know. The reports came from Cheryl, Mr. Davidson confirmed. So, you're telling me that out of the 43 people in this office, only one person has noticed this alleged drinking problem. Only one person has smelled alcohol on me or witnessed erratic behavior. And that person happens to be someone who had a personal financial interest in the account that I was given instead of her. I could see doubt creeping into Linda's expression, but Mr. Davidson remained stern. Margaret, we also found evidence at your desk. Evidence that anyone could have planted. Evidence that was conveniently discovered right after I was called into this meeting. Tell me, who suggested you search my workspace? Another pause. Another exchanged look. Cheryl mentioned that she'd noticed you acting strangely this morning and suggested we might want to check your desk area. Linda admitted quietly. The picture was becoming clearer by the minute, but I knew that proving it would be the real challenge. Cheryl had been smart about this. She'd built a case slowly, established a pattern of concerned reporting, and then provided the physical evidence to back up her claims. If I hadn't called Sarah, if I hadn't started questioning the timing and circumstances, I might have walked out of here without a job, and without ever understanding what had really happened to me. I'm not signing anything today, I said firmly. I need time to process this information and consider my options. Mr. Davidson's jaw tightened. Margaret, we're trying to help you here. If you're dealing with a substance abuse problem, the company has resources. I don't have a substance abuse problem. What I have is a coworker who saw an opportunity to get back an account she felt entitled to, and she's been systematically sabotaging me to make that happen. I stood up from the table, surprised by how steady I felt despite everything that had happened. I'll be back tomorrow morning, and we can continue this conversation then. But I want you both to think about something tonight. In all the time you've known me, have you ever seen any indication that I have a drinking problem? Have you ever smelled alcohol on me? Have you ever witnessed any of this erratic behavior that Cheryl has been reporting? I could see the wheels turning in Linda's mind. She'd worked with me for 3 years. She'd seen me in stressful situations, early morning meetings, late afternoon crises. If I'd been drinking at work, she would have noticed something herself. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m., Mr. Davidson said finally. But Margaret, I strongly advise you to think seriously about getting help if you need it. I left the conference room feeling like I was walking through a minefield. Cheryl was at her desk, typing intently at her computer, but I could feel her watching me from the corner of her eye. I gathered my purse and jacket without stopping at my own desk. I needed to get out of there before I said something that would make this situation worse. But as I waited for the elevator, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Cheryl approaching, her face arranged in an expression of concern that now looked completely artificial to me. "Margaret," she said softly, "I heard about the meeting. I just want you to know that I'm here if you need someone to talk to." The audacity of it took my breath away. Here she was, pretending to care about me after orchestrating what could have been the end of my career. I stared at her for a long moment, watching the way she held her head slightly tilted, the practiced concern in her eyes. "That's very kind of you, Cheryl," I said evenly. "But I think I have all the support I need." Something flickered across her face, just for a second. Annoyance, maybe, or frustration that her performance wasn't having the desired effect. But she recovered quickly. "I know this must be really hard for you," she continued. "Admitting you have a problem is the first step, you know. And I want you to know that I don't judge you for it. We've all been through difficult times." The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. As they began to close, I saw Cheryl still standing there, watching me with that same fake concern plastered on her face. The moment the doors shut completely, I felt like I could breathe again. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt exhausted, like I'd run a marathon. All I wanted was to collapse on my couch and try to make sense of this nightmare. But as I walked up to my front door, I saw my brother James sitting on my porch steps. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, and I could see the worry etched across his face. "Sarah called me," he said simply. "She told me what happened at work." I sat down heavily beside him on the steps. "So now you know. Your sister is apparently the office drunk, according to my colleagues." James was quiet for a moment, then he turned to look at me directly. "Do you remember when we were kids, and Tommy Peterson kept telling everyone at school that you cheated on that science test?" I frowned, not sure where he was going with this. "Vaguely. Why?" "You came home crying because even some of your friends started to believe it. You were so upset that people would think you were capable of cheating." He leaned back against the porch railing. "Mom made you go back the next day and demand that the teacher show Tommy your test compared to the answer key. Turned out you'd gotten 3 answers wrong that were right on the key." The memory came flooding back. I'd been maybe 12 years old, and it had felt like the end of the world when kids started whispering about me in the hallways. "Tommy had been copying off your paper all semester," James continued. "He was just trying to throw suspicion off himself." "I remember. But James, this isn't elementary school. This is my career, my reputation. Cheryl has been so much more sophisticated about this than Tommy Peterson ever was." James nodded. "That's true, but the principle is the same. Someone is lying about you to cover their own tracks or advance their own agenda. And just like back then, the truth is going to come out." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Having James here made me feel less alone, less like I was going crazy. He'd known me my entire life. If anyone could see through false accusations, it would be him. "Sarah said you think this coworker has been setting you up," James said eventually. I told him everything. About the Hartwell account, about the strange incidents that had been happening, about finding the travel bottle in my desk. James listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. "So, what's your next move?" he asked when I finished. "I honestly don't know. How do you prove a negative?" How do you prove you haven't been doing something? Especially when someone has been so careful to make it look like you have? James stood up and stretched. You know what? I think you need to talk to someone who knows about this kind of thing. Not just the drinking part, but the workplace sabotage part. Like who? Remember my friend Mike from college? He works in corporate security now. He deals with internal theft, embezzlement, workplace harassment. He might have some ideas about how to document what's been happening to you. I shook my head. James, I can't drag more people into this mess. And besides, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just being paranoid and there's some other explanation? Margaret, listen to yourself. You're doubting your own perceptions because someone has been systematically undermining you for weeks. That's exactly what they want you to do. He had a point. I'd been so focused on trying to understand how this could be happening that I'd started questioning my own judgment about everything. Let me at least call Mike and ask him some hypothetical questions, James pressed. You don't have to commit to anything, but maybe he can give you some ideas about what kind of evidence you'd need to build a case. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sarah. Are you okay? Been thinking about you all afternoon? I showed James the message, and he smiled slightly. See? You do have people in your corner. You're not as alone in this as you think. I texted Sarah back. At home with James, still processing everything. Thank you for earlier. Her response came back quickly. Want me to come over? I can bring dinner? I looked at James, who was reading over my shoulder. Tell her yes, he said. We should all put our heads together on this. As I typed back to Sarah, I realized that for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I was starting to feel like maybe I could fight back. I had people who believed me, who knew me well enough to see through Cheryl's manipulation. But even as that thought crossed my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that Cheryl wasn't done yet. If she'd been this calculated about setting me up, what would she do when she realized I wasn't going to go quietly? An hour later, Sarah arrived with takeout containers and a determined expression. She set the food on my kitchen table and immediately pulled out her phone. I've been thinking about this all afternoon, she said, scrolling through her notes app. If Cheryl has been this systematic about framing you, then she's probably left a trail. We just need to figure out where to look. James grabbed plates from the cabinet. What kind of trail? Think about it, Sarah continued. She had to know Margaret's schedule to plant that bottle. She had to time her conversations with the boss perfectly. She's been watching and planning. I sat down heavily at the table. But how does that help me? Even if she's been calculating about it, I still can't prove she's lying. Maybe you don't need to prove she's lying, Sarah said, opening one of the containers. Maybe you just need to prove you're telling the truth. James paused with a forkful of food halfway to his mouth. What do you mean? I mean documentation. Margaret, when was the last time you actually had a drink? Like, anywhere? I thought about it. 2 weeks ago, we went to that new restaurant downtown, remember? I had a glass of wine with dinner. With me? Sarah said, making a note on her phone. And before that? Maybe a month ago? James's birthday party. With both of us, James added. And you had what, 2 beers the whole evening? Sarah looked up from her phone. See? We can establish a pattern. You're not someone who drinks regularly, let alone at work. Anyone who knows you would vouch for that. But who's going to believe us over Cheryl? I asked. We're biased. We're your friends and family. Are we the only ones who've noticed this is out of character for you? Sarah pressed. What about other people at work? I shook my head. I can't drag my other co-workers into this. What if it backfires? What if Cheryl convinces them I really do have a drinking problem? James set down his fork. Margaret, you're doing it again. You're so afraid of making waves that you're not fighting for yourself. The words stung because they were true. I'd always been the peacekeeper, the one who avoided confrontation. Even now, facing false accusations that could destroy my career, my instinct was to keep quiet and hope it would somehow resolve itself. I just don't understand why she's doing this, I said quietly. I've never done anything to hurt her. Maybe that's not the point, Sarah said gently. Maybe this isn't about you at all. Maybe it's about something she wants, and you're just in the way. I looked up at her. What do you mean? Think about it. What would happen if you got fired or forced to quit? Who would benefit? The realization hit me like a cold wave. The promotion. There's a supervisor position opening up next month. I was planning to apply for it. And Cheryl knows that? James asked. Of course she knows. We've talked about it. She even said she was thinking about applying too, but she didn't think she had enough experience yet. Sarah and James exchanged a look. Well, she'd have a lot better chance if her main competition was out of the picture, Sarah said. I felt something shift inside me, a spark of anger replacing the confusion and hurt I'd been carrying. She's trying to destroy my reputation to get a promotion? It makes sense, James said. And it explains why she's been so calculated about it. This isn't personal hatred, it's career strategy. My phone buzzed on the table. All three of us looked at it. The message was from Cheryl. Hey, hope you're feeling better? Don't worry about the meeting with Mr. Harrison. I'm sure everything will work out fine. The casual tone, the fake concern, the subtle reminder that my job was in jeopardy. Reading it now, with this new understanding, I could see the manipulation so clearly. She's checking on you, Sarah said, reading over my shoulder. Making sure you're still rattled. I stared at the message, my anger building. For weeks, I'd been questioning myself, losing sleep, wondering what I'd done wrong. And all the while, Cheryl had been orchestrating every moment of my misery. I'm not going to let her win, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. James smiled. There's my sister. But even as I felt this new resolve, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a work email, sent to everyone in our department. The subject line made my blood run cold. Reminder, employee wellness resources available. I stared at the email, my hands starting to shake. The timing was too perfect, too calculated. Just as I was beginning to understand what Cheryl was really doing, she was escalating things. What is it? Sarah asked, noticing my expression. I turned my phone so they could see the screen. It's from HR, about employee wellness resources. She's copying everyone in the department on reminders about substance abuse programs. James leaned forward. She sent that? No, it's from HR, but... I scrolled down to see who had requested the department-wide reminder. There it was, buried in the forwarded message chain. Cheryl had reached out to HR expressing concern about workplace wellness and suggesting they send resources to the whole team. She's making it public without making it public, Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. Everyone's going to wonder why HR is suddenly sending addiction resources. The weight of it hit me full force. My coworkers would see this email and start connecting dots that didn't exist. They'd remember every time I looked tired, every time I seemed distracted, every casual comment about needing coffee to get through the day. Cheryl was poisoning the well, making sure that even if I proved my innocence, doubt would linger. She's destroying my reputation piece by piece, I whispered. Even if Mr. Harrison believes me tomorrow, how do I come back from this? How do I work with people who think I might have a drinking problem? James reached across the table and took my hand. Hey, look at me. You're going to fight this because you have something she doesn't. What's that? The truth. And people who believe in you? Sarah nodded. We need to document everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every calculated move she's made. If she wants to play games, we'll show everyone exactly what kind of game she's been playing. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Cheryl. Saw the HR email. Hope no one takes it the wrong way. You know how people can jump to conclusions. The fake concern dripping from every word made my stomach turn. She was checking on me again, making sure her latest move was having the desired effect. But this time, instead of feeling helpless, I felt something else entirely. She's getting sloppy, I said, showing them the message. Look at this. She's basically admitting she knows people will jump to conclusions. James smiled grimly. Save that. Save everything. I'm going to call Mr. Harrison tonight, I said, surprising myself with the decision. I'm not waiting until tomorrow to defend myself. I'm going to tell him exactly what's been happening, and I'm going to ask him to investigate properly. Good, Sarah said, and we'll help you prepare exactly what to say. But even as I felt this new determination, my phone rang. Mr. Harrison's name appeared on the screen, and my heart stopped. He was calling me on a Sunday evening. That couldn't be good. Answer it, James whispered. You've got this. I took a deep breath and swiped to accept the call, but the first words out of Mr. Harrison's mouth made my blood run cold. I think we need to move our meeting up. Can you come in first thing tomorrow morning? And you might want to bring a representative with you. The formal tone in Mr. Harrison's voice sent ice through my veins. A representative. The words hung in the air like a threat, and I could feel James and Sarah watching me with growing alarm. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to keep my voice steady. Sir, if this is about what I think it's about, I need you to know that there are things happening here that you're not aware of. False accusations being made by someone with their own agenda. There was a long pause on the other end, and I could hear papers rustling. That's exactly what we need to discuss. I've received some very concerning information today, and frankly, the situation has escalated beyond what I initially thought. 8:30 tomorrow morning. Conference room B. The line went dead, and I stared at the phone in my trembling hands. The formal conference room. Not his office where we'd had friendly chats about projects and deadlines. This was serious disciplinary territory. What did he say? Sarah asked, though my expression probably told her everything she needed to know. Conference room B, 8:30, with a representative. I set the phone down on the kitchen table like it might explode. She's done something else. Something worse than the email. James ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our childhood whenever he was working through a problem. What could she have done on a Sunday? Most people aren't even checking work emails. But I was already thinking, my mind racing through the possibilities. Cheryl was methodical, calculating. She wouldn't have stopped at the HR email. She would have wanted to guarantee that tomorrow's meeting went exactly as she planned. She called him, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. She probably called him at home, acting all concerned and reluctant. Told him she was worried about me, that maybe she'd seen more than she initially reported. Fed him just enough details to make him panic about liability issues. Sarah's face went pale. On a Sunday evening, when he's with his family, probably relaxed and not thinking clearly about office politics. When he'd be most likely to react emotionally instead of logically. Exactly. I stood up and started pacing around the small kitchen, my bare feet cold against the tile floor. She knows he has teenage kids. She probably painted some picture about workplace safety, about what might happen if something went wrong and the company had ignored the warning signs. The unfairness of it made my chest tight with rage. While I'd been here with my family, trying to process this nightmare and figure out how to defend myself, Cheryl had been working. Manipulating. Poisoning my boss against me with carefully crafted lies designed to make her seem like the concerned colleague just trying to do the right thing. James slammed his palm against the table, making both Sarah and me jump. This is insane. She's systematically destroying your career, and for what? Some twisted sense of competition? Because she's jealous of your success? It doesn't matter why anymore, I said, though my voice cracked slightly. The damage is done. By the time I walk into that conference room tomorrow, Mr. Harrison will already believe I'm guilty. He'll be looking for reasons to justify whatever decision he's already made. I slumped back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the afternoon was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made everything feel hopeless. This wasn't just about my job anymore. This was about my entire professional reputation, my ability to support myself, my future in this industry. You know what the worst part is? I said quietly, staring at my hands. Even if I somehow prove my innocence, I'll never be able to work with these people the same way again. Every meeting, every project, every casual conversation will have this shadow hanging over it. People will always wonder if maybe there was some truth to it. Sarah reached over and covered my hands with hers. Her fingers were warm, grounding me in the moment. That's exactly what she wants you to think. She wants you to give up, to walk away, so she doesn't have to face the consequences of what she's done. But what if I can't prove it? What if tomorrow I walk in there and it's just my word against hers, and she's already convinced him that I'm lying? Then we make sure it's not just your word, James said firmly. We go through everything, every interaction, every email, every conversation you can remember. We build a timeline that shows her pattern of behavior. I wanted to believe him, but the weight of tomorrow morning pressed down on me like a physical thing. Conference room B with its long mahogany table and uncomfortable chairs, where I'd sat through layoffs and disciplinary meetings for other people, never imagining I'd be on the receiving end. My phone buzzed with another message, and this time it was from Mr. Harrison himself. Please review the employee handbook section on workplace conduct before tomorrow's meeting. The clinical, distant tone made my stomach lurch. This was really happening. In less than 12 hours, I'd be sitting across from my boss, trying to convince him that a trusted colleague had been systematically lying about me, while he looked at me through the lens of every terrible thing Cheryl had whispered in his ear. I need to call in sick, I said suddenly. I need more time to prepare, to figure out what to say. No. Sarah's voice was sharp, surprising me. That's the worst thing you could do. It makes you look guilty, like you're trying to avoid accountability. You have to face this head on. She was right, but that didn't make it any easier. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine walking into that building tomorrow morning, riding the elevator to the 3rd floor, knowing that Cheryl would probably be there early, playing the part of the concerned colleague who just wanted what was best for everyone. When I opened my eyes, both James and Sarah were watching me with expressions of fierce determination that reminded me why I loved them so much. They believed in me, even when I was struggling to believe in myself. Okay, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Let's do this. Let's figure out exactly what I'm going to say to make him listen. But even as we started planning, I couldn't shake the feeling that Cheryl had already won. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray, oppressive sky that seemed to mirror everything I was feeling inside. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning while replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Cheryl, searching for clues I'd missed about her true intentions. The coffee I made tasted bitter, and my hands shook slightly as I got dressed in my most professional outfit, a navy blazer that suddenly felt like armor I wasn't sure would protect me. Sarah had texted me at 6 a.m. with a simple message. "You've got this. Remember what we talked about." The previous night, we'd spent hours going through my interactions with Cheryl, mapping out inconsistencies in her behavior, times when she'd been overly interested in my personal life or my relationship with Mr. Harrison. It had been exhausting, but illuminating. The office building looked the same as always. Glass and steel reaching toward the cloudy sky. People hurrying in and out with their coffee cups and purposeful expressions. But everything felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that someone I trusted had been working against me from the shadows. I rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, my reflection in the polished doors showing a woman who looked far more composed than she felt. The familiar ding of arrival made my stomach clench, but I stepped out with my head held high. Cheryl was already at her desk, typing away with what appeared to be intense concentration. She looked up as I passed, offering that same bright smile that now seemed so calculated. "Good morning. How are you feeling about everything?" The question was loaded, designed to sound caring while actually probing for weakness. I could see it so clearly now, the way she tilted her head with false concern, the way her eyes watched my face for any sign of distress she could later report to Mr. Harrison. "I'm fine, thank you," I replied evenly, not breaking stride toward my own desk. I could feel her watching me as I settled in, probably disappointed that I wasn't falling apart or showing signs of the drinking problem she'd fabricated. The morning crawled by with excruciating slowness. Every time Mr. Harrison walked past, I wondered what thoughts were running through his mind. Did he see me as the reliable employee I'd always been? Or had Cheryl's poison already transformed me into someone suspicious in his eyes? At 10:45, I gathered my notes and made my way to conference room B. The long mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the uncomfortable chairs seemed to loom with judgment. Mr. Harrison was already there, reviewing a file that I assumed contained Cheryl's accusations against me. He looked up as I entered, his expression neutral but somehow different than usual. There was a distance there that hadn't existed before, a professional coldness that made my heart sink. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. The same chair where I'd sat during my annual reviews, receiving praise for my dedication and attention to detail. Now it felt like sitting in the defendant's dock. "I appreciate you coming in to discuss this situation," Mr. Harrison began, his tone carefully measured. "I want you to know that these conversations are never easy, but they're necessary for maintaining a professional workplace environment." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "I understand completely, and I appreciate the opportunity to address whatever concerns have been raised." He leaned back slightly, studying my face with the same analytical look he used when reviewing quarterly reports. "Cheryl came to me with some troubling observations about changes in your behavior, your performance, and specifically about alcohol consumption during work hours. These are serious allegations that I can't ignore." The way he said Cheryl's name, with complete trust and respect, made my chest tighten. She'd positioned herself perfectly as the concerned colleague, the responsible employee who was just looking out for the company's best interests. "I can assure you that I have never consumed alcohol during work hours," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Not once, in all my years here." Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, making a note on his pad. "Cheryl mentioned that she's noticed the smell of alcohol on your breath during morning meetings and that your work quality has declined recently. She also said you've seemed disoriented and have made several uncharacteristic errors. Each accusation felt like a physical blow. Cheryl had been thorough, building a case that would be almost impossible to disprove without concrete evidence. My word against hers, exactly as I'd feared. "Sir, I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding," I began, pulling out the notes Sarah, James, and I had compiled. "I've never had any issues with alcohol, and my work performance has remained consistent. In fact, I'd like to review some specific incidents that might explain why these accusations have been made." But before I could continue, there was a soft knock on the conference room door. Mr. Harrison looked annoyed at the interruption, but called out, "Come in." Cheryl stepped into the room, her face a perfect mask of professional concern mixed with what looked like reluctant duty. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's been an urgent call about the Morrison account that needs immediate attention." The timing was too convenient, too perfectly calculated to disrupt the momentum I was trying to build. She'd been listening, waiting for the right moment to insert herself into the conversation and derail my defense. Mr. Harrison glanced between us, clearly torn between addressing the urgent call and finishing our discussion. "Can it wait 30 minutes? Cheryl bit her lip, as if genuinely conflicted. "I'm afraid not. The client is threatening to pull their contract if we don't respond immediately." I watched this performance with a mixture of admiration and revulsion. She was masterful at this game, always appearing to put the company first while simultaneously undermining me at every turn. "We'll need to continue this discussion later," Mr. Harrison said, already standing. "I'll have my assistant schedule another meeting for this afternoon." As they prepared to leave, Cheryl turned to me with that same false smile. "I hope everything works out well," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. But there was something else in her eyes, a flicker of triumph that she couldn't quite hide. She thought she'd won, that this interruption had given her more time to solidify Mr. Harrison's doubts about me. What she didn't know was that James had been right about one thing. People who lie compulsively eventually make mistakes. And as I sat alone in that conference room, replaying every word of her performance, I realized she'd just made a critical error that might finally expose the truth about who she really was. The Morrison account emergency turned out to be completely fabricated. I discovered this 20 minutes after being left alone in the conference room, when I decided to check our client database on my laptop. The Morrison account showed no recent activity, no pending issues, and certainly no threatening calls about contract cancellation. In fact, their last communication had been a satisfaction survey submitted 3 days ago with glowing reviews. My hands trembled slightly as I stared at the screen, the fluorescent lights overhead casting harsh shadows across the mahogany conference table. The revelation hit me like ice water. Cheryl hadn't just been spreading lies about my supposed drinking problem. She was actively manipulating situations in real time, creating fictional emergencies to control the narrative and timing of conversations that could expose her. The conference room suddenly felt suffocating, its beige walls seeming to close in as I processed the implications. How many other urgent situations had she manufactured over the months? How many times had she steered Mr. Harrison away from information that might contradict her carefully constructed version of events? I gathered my materials with renewed determination and headed straight to James's cubicle. The open office buzzed with its usual afternoon energy, keyboards clicking and phones ringing, but everything felt different now that I understood the level of manipulation we were dealing with. "James," I said quietly, sliding into the empty chair beside his desk. "I need to show you something." He looked up from his screen, immediately reading the urgency in my expression. "What happened in there?" I explained about the Morrison account interruption and what I'd discovered afterward. James's face grew progressively darker as I spoke, his jaw tightening with each detail. "That's incredibly bold," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's not just lying anymore. She's actively sabotaging meetings in real time." "It gets worse," I continued, pulling out my phone to show him the client database. "Look at this timeline. Every single emergency that's pulled Mr. Harrison away from our department meetings over the past 2 months coincides with discussions about budget allocations or performance reviews." James studied the information, his analytical mind immediately grasping the pattern. "She's been controlling information flow systematically. This isn't random gossip. This is calculated corporate manipulation." The weight of our discovery settled between us. We weren't just dealing with workplace rumors anymore. This was deliberate, strategic undermining that could affect multiple people's careers and the company's operations. "We need Sarah," I said, already standing. "And we need to approach Mr. Harrison again before Cheryl has time to create another distraction." 20 minutes later, the three of us reconvened in Sarah's office, a small space made even more cramped by the urgency of our situation. Sarah's usually immaculate desk was covered with printouts and notes as we laid out everything we'd uncovered. "The pattern is undeniable," Sarah said, highlighting key dates on a timeline she'd created. "Every time there's been a significant departmental decision or performance discussion, there's been a convenient crisis that's redirected attention away from thorough analysis." James nodded grimly. "And notice how she's always the one bringing these emergencies to Mr. Harrison's attention. She's positioned herself as indispensable while simultaneously creating the very problems she's solving." I stared at the documentation spread before us, feeling a mixture of vindication and exhaustion. Months of self-doubt and questioning my own perceptions were finally giving way to clear, undeniable evidence. "The question now," I said slowly, "is how do we present this to Mr. Harrison in a way that he'll actually listen to and believe?" Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "We don't just tell him, we show him. Set up a situation where he can witness the manipulation firsthand." The suggestion hung in the air between us, loaded with both possibility and risk. What we were contemplating could either finally expose the truth or backfire spectacularly if Cheryl realized what we were doing. "It's dangerous," James warned. "If she catches on to what we're planning, she could escalate her campaign against all of us." I looked between my two colleagues, these people who had believed me when I barely believed myself, who had invested their time and energy in uncovering a truth that could have easily remained buried under Cheryl's skillful manipulations. "Maybe," I said finally. "But doing nothing guarantees she continues destroying people's careers and manipulating company operations. At least this way, we have a chance to stop her." The afternoon sun slanted through Sarah's office window, casting long shadows across our makeshift war room. Outside, the city continued its oblivious rhythm, while inside, three people prepared to take a stand against a master manipulator who had operated unchecked for far too long.